All right, let's talk about cabinet blocks. So we're going to open up AutoCAD here and we're going to jump right in. So in today's age, we have a lot of blocks in AutoCAD that actually are going to be very useful to you for drafting cabinets. We are still working on some of these too, of course, but have a decent amount already started. So go ahead and jump in and we'll start looking at those. Last video we covered cabinet hardware or cabinet related hardware. This video, the intention is to focus on the elevations, sections, and details, and any other cabinet components that you're going to need for your cabinet drawing. So I'm just going to open up a blank AutoCAD template here so we can mess around in here. If you don't already have your tool palettes pulled up for this, go ahead and type in tool palettes on your keyboard and go down to that command, hit enter. It should open up automatically. Mine is docked on my sidebar. Yours may be docked elsewhere. That's okay. It's fine to put it wherever you'd like to move it to. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to go down to right click on here and move on down to cabinets. So on-site casework. Starting with the elevation views, let's go ahead and drag and drop these in. I'm just going to show you all the different ones that are on here already and available to you. So I'm just making a line here so I can do that. Usually the first block you drag in from the tool palette does take a little bit of time for it to load. There it goes. It does take a little bit of time for that to work just because of it having to reference the cloud server. It does take a second for it to download and then open it up. What I'm going to do though is kind of space these out a little bit on this line here so we can start to see the different cabinet types that we have and kind of go through what those are. All right, so as you can see, as I'm doing this, I'll just kind of narrate a little bit of what these cabinets are as we go. The first one on the list, the open base cabinet, is exactly what it sounds like. So what that is a cabinet with no door and no drawer front, meaning that it is open to the front. And so as you can see, that's this guy here. There is no door or drawer blocking the view from the inside of the cabinet. So that's what's called an open cabinet. Moving down the list, of course, you've got your one door base cabinet. That's the second one there. That's just a single door base cabinet, very common in the millwork industry. You're going to see that all the time. As you go down the list, then you have your two door base cabinet, which is essentially the same thing, just has two doors on that cabinet instead. Moving down the list, you have your ADA base cabinet. Now, we did talk about that a little bit when we got into the hardware part of the cabinet training. That is the cabinet style that has that half-inch gap at the floor, as well as the special ADA cabinet bracket that we use to attach the base trim to the door. That way it allows you to have wheelchair access to the inside of that cabinet. Moving down the list, you can see that first one there is labeled a trash base cabinet. We also looked at those a little bit during the cabinet hardware training. Those usually are used mostly to house a trash can pull-out cabinet. So we do use those all the time as well. Moving down the list from there, you have your two drawer, 3 drawer, 4 drawer base cabinets. Those are all just essentially just standard drawer cabinets. So we're going to move that down. Next to that, then you have your your ADA vanity screen, which we did also touch base a little bit on that as well. In the last video, we talked about the Aventos HK hardware, which is used to make that vanity screen attach and open without being detachable. So, I'm just trying to line these up a little better here. That's a lot better. Okay. Let's see, moving down from there, you have these combination cabinets which utilize doors and drawers. So you can see this one has a drawer at the top. This is a one drawer, one door base cabinet. You have a two drawer, two door base cabinet. Sometimes you will also have a two door, one drawer base cabinet as well. And then over to the right, you also have what's considered a microwave cabinet. A lot of times they're used on islands where you have a drawer with a microwave built into it above the drawer. So usually what that is like either a fixed or adjustable shelf that sits above the drawer. This is an open cabinet here. And then over here, it's the same thing. This is a two-door version of the same cabinet. So it's got an open cabinet above for a microwave or appliance to sit within. And then below is a two-door unit. And this one's actually a drawer. So we have a drawer on this one and a two-door unit on this one. To the right of that, you will see that you have your upper cabinets. So you have your single door upper cabinet as well as your two-door upper cabinet. And again, these are just the elevation blocks that we use for our cabinets. There are going to be times where these are not going to cover all of the bases for you, and you may have to actually make your own or may have to explode these blocks or sort of doctor them up to work for what you need. But for the most part, these are going to cover all of the different cabinet variations that you will see on every job. So when we look at these, I'm just going to pull up one of these cabinet blocks so we can start to dig into it. So let's focus in on the two-door base. That is the basic, most common cabinet that we see in the industry. With these blocks, well, before we even get into that, one thing you should have up to is if you type in properties on your keyboard and hit enter once that appears on your command prompt, it will open up this other sidebar over here. The sidebar is your properties pane. Similar to the tool palette, it docks on the side and it allows you to actually, this one is special because it allows you to manipulate blocks or other items on your drawing without having to use your actual user interface here. Now, that's not to say you can't use that, you can for sure, but when you click on any of these cabinet elevation blocks, you are going to see that there are a few things that you can mess with here. This grip that's up here allows you to manipulate the height of this cabinet. So if you wanted the cabinet to be 36 inches tall, you can type in that dimension here. If you want to go to 34, you can type that in here. It'll resize your cabinet automatically for you. The same goes for the width. The width is down here at the bottom right. If you need to adjust this for any reason, you have the ability to do so by clicking on that grip down there and typing in that dimension there. So that allows you to manipulate the width of your cabinet, and the height would be the grip that's up top. Sometimes the toe kick will actually have to be adjusted. Typically what you will see is a 4-inch by 3-inch toe kick. However, sometimes an architect may have a very specific toe kick height. And if that's the case, in order to change that, all you do is you click on this grip that's at the top of that toe kick, and you can change it to anything you need it to be. So if I needed this to be 2.5, I can adjust it there. If I need it to be 4, I can adjust it there. That's all available to you for adjusting this cabinet to make it fit your needs. Also, if you notice on the bottom left-hand corner of all of these cabinet elevation blocks, there are a number of drop-downs. These are also accessible through this properties pane here. The 4 drop-downs are fillers, finished ends, shelves, locks, and actually that's it. So fillers, finished ends, shelves, and locks. If you click on these, it kind of explains what those do. So if you needed a filler, that would be when you have a cabinet that's abutting a wall, you would click on that first drop down and you'd select what side of the cabinet needs that filler. Now, sometimes you might actually need it on both sides. Sometimes you only need it on one, but those fillers are changeable by clicking on that drop down right there. The next drop down there is going to be your finish end. So this again is going to be if you have a cabinet that is open to the room. So meaning that you can see the side of that cabinet from anywhere else in that room. If that's the case, you do want to make sure it has a finished end on it, because that means that we are going to be applying the same finish that's on the front of the cabinet to that side of that cabinet. And again, just like fillers, you may need a finished end on the left, the right, or both. So there we go. There's an option for all of that there. Let me turn those off. The next drop down there is referring to the quantity of shelves that you need for your cabinet. Most times you're going to see cabinets with one shelf inside of them. However, this block has the option to add 2 and even 3 shelves. So if you ever needed that, you have the option to add those there. Sometimes 3 shelves may not be enough though. It depends on the architect's needs. If they have a cabinet that needs more shelves, you may have to add those in custom. The block only allows you to go up to 3 because of the limitations of what we have in AutoCAD, the number of views that you can have within a block, which we'll talk about when we get into block editing later. Anyways, so you can drop down and go no shelf, 1 shelf, 2 shelf, or 3 shelves in this cabinet. And the last drop down that you see here is the addition of a lock. So lucky for you, today's age, we don't actually need to use that grid quite as often that I was showing you in the last video for cabinet hardware. The lock locations that you see here in these blocks are already predetermined based on that detail grid that we looked at in the last video with the locks. So if you need a lock, it's as easy as saying, yes, I need a lock, or no lock. And if you do want a lock, it's already in the right location. If you don't want a lock, that's fine too. It's done, you don't need it. So those settings apply to all of these cabinets. So maybe not all of them, because like, of course, like your open cabinet, you can't put a lock there because there's no door to lock. But this one still has the option to add fillers. It still has the option to add finish ends. It still has the option to add shelves. So you can manipulate these however you need to work with what you're dealing with. Some of these also, like the trash pullout, are limited to only having fillers and finished ends. There are no shelves in trash pullouts, so we don't need to show those there. And also, those usually don't lock, so we don't have a lock tied to that cabinet. On things like your drawer stack, of course, you're not going to have shelves in there either. But when you do have a lock, these are already set up to show the location of what we call the gang lock. So if you have a gang lock on your cabinet, this is the exact location of where that would need to be mounted for this to work. So that helps you a little bit there. Vanity screens really are just limited to if you have a filler or if you have a finished end. No locks on those either. And of course, that's pretty much covering the bases there for elevation views. So So as you're drawing cabinets, these are going to be very, very helpful for what you need in order to be able to make these drawings a little quicker. So, all right, let's move on to 26. As we move on to the next set of cabinet blocks, you're going to be looking at cabinet sections. So cabinet sections, we have our verticals up top here. It's exactly the same as the cabinets below, pretty much. And then you have your upper cabinets below that. So upper cabinet sections are up there as well. Below that, you'll notice that there are horizontal sections. And what that is a horizontal section is going to be cutting through a cabinet like this. So you're cutting through that cabinet and looking straight down at the floor. Whereas the other sections that you're seeing up there, the vertical ones, are kind of looking like this, where you're slicing through that cabinet like this and looking to the right-hand side. So I pull one of those in just to show you what it would look like. This is a base cabinet. These are the current blocks that we have. They may update over time, so if they do, this video may be outdated by the time you see it. But you pull this in. This is your standard base cabinet. As you add to these, they're kind of like a cabinet section that you have to build as you go, which is where the next tab comes into play. These are cabinet parts, which are parts that go into each cabinet. So you essentially, currently the way things are, you start with a base cabinet or an upper cabinet. You take that as your shell, you go into your cabinet parts, and you pull in things like shelves or doors or countertops and things like that. And you add that to your section view, kind of like just decorating the base model of what you have. On the cabinet section, similar to what you already are used to seeing in your elevation view, you have a height adjustment here. So that allows you to adjust the height of your cabinet. You have a depth adjustment in this case, meaning that you can change how deep that cabinet looks as you adjust it here. You can click on it and manually type in a dimension, or you can click and drag. You also have the same deal here with the toe kick. You can adjust the height of this if you need to. All right, I'm going to undo that real quick. And then you can also adjust the depth of that toe kick as well. So let's say the architect really wanted an 8-inch toe kick depth. You can do that here, but most likely it's never going to be like that. So anyways, so that allows you to manipulate this cabinet section enough to be able to do what you need to do. There's also a section over here that allows you to change the height of the back. So as you're adjusting this doesn't get used very often, but let's say you have something in this cabinet where you can't have a back in there. Well, you can erase the back by using that grip and removing it from the cabinet. You can also lower it too if you needed to. You probably won't have to do that for a long time, but it is an option there just to let you know if you ever do need to remove the back for any reason, there is an option to do that without exploding the block. Now, if you have an open cabinet, you're going to also need to make what is called a full top. So open cabinets and tall cabinets will require a full top. Currently, the block does not have that built into it, but a full top would mean that instead of having 2 rails up here, you're going to have one entire top that's made out of a singular panel instead of 2 individual rails. So this whole top is going to span from front to back of the cabinet. The reason why that's important is because if you have an open cabinet or a tall cabinet, the customer is going to be able to see up into there as there is no door on that cabinet, or a tall cabinet, if the door's open, clearly you're going to be able to see up there because it's taller than a person typically. And so you want to make sure that you're not able to see the ceiling above, or in this case, if it's an open cabinet, you don't want to see the plywood subtop for the subtop there. So that's only to do with open cabinets and tall cabinets. Any other cabinet, you can use the 2 rails that are here. So just worth noting at least. The horizontal sections of your cabinet. So let's pull one of those in. We'll go with the 1-door base cabinet here. Those guys, they have the hinge already placed in them. So depending on what type of cabinet you select from here, you're going to have that hinge already drawn. These also have the same types of options as well. So you can change these if you grab the wrong one by mistake. You can pull in a different cabinet style. So if you need an ADA cabinet, this actually shows that metal bracket, the easy kick we talked about in the cabinet hardware video. If you need like a drawer cabinet, this allows you to show the drawer. It also limits you to having those 2-inch increments for the drawer slide. So you can't actually draw a drawer that's outside of that 2-inch increment. Also going over to the 2-door, 1-door cabinets, you can see that the hinges are already added to those. And you also have the same grips here that allow you to change the depth and the, 36 inches, the depth and the width of the cabinet. And as you change the width and the depth of the cabinet, you'll notice that the cabinet doors stay centered in the middle. So as you change that, that all stays the same. Moving on to the next part down here, you're probably looking at this and wondering what this is. So trash cutout sections, those down here are just a detail view. So as you have a trash pull-out cabinet like this, you're going to see, I'm going to switch this real quick. You're going to see that you have like a horizontal section through that cabinet, this being the back of the cabinet, this side being the front, and this is your drawer with the trash can cutout on it. And these are those button fix hardwares that we talked about in the cabinet hardware video. So that's looking at a top-down view, removing the top of the cabinet, being able to see the cutout of that trash can. These blocks are also very nifty because you can switch between the 3 standard trash cans that we typically use. And you can also change the direction of which it's spun. So if you need it to turn the other way for any reason, you can do that. These all also have the same adjustments like the other one where they have 2-inch increments for the drawer box. They also have width and depth adjustments. So you have that available to you as well. We have not talked about this yet, but sometimes you may need a cabinet with ventilation in the toe kick. So really what that is at the front of the cabinet. Let me zoom in on this. This is a 1-door cabinet looking straight down, like cutting through it and looking down at the floor. You have your door here, and you have your cutout here, which is what we call a ventilation cutout. This is in the bottom of the cabinet. So if you wanted to see what that looked like in the section, that would be in this area right here. Let me make an arrow here real quick. That would be right there. So that is where that ventilation cutout would be. So really, like, the cabinet might have a notch right here, and this would go away. That's that ventilation notch there, which sometimes for specific equipment, like things like maybe a water heater or like some kind of like a beverage dispenser or different things like that, may need ventilation in the cabinet. And so if an architect does ask for that, you have those ventilated toe kick details here. There's a 1-door as well as a 2-door option, and they both have width adjustments where you can change the width of your cabinet there too. All right, moving on to cabinet parts. So this is where we get to the fun stuff. So we talked about earlier with the cabinet section that you're going to probably need these. Cabinet parts are the different components that go into a cabinet. So as you get into drawing a cabinet, you have your adjustable shelf. So if the architect is asking for an adjustable shelf within a cabinet, you would bring in the adjustable shelf block. You can use the move command in AutoCAD just by typing that in, hit enter, select this shelf, and then you want to grab the center, so this midpoint right here of that shelf. And it's hard to see, but there's a little white dot right there at the front of the cabinet that is perfectly centered between the top and the bottom of the cabinet, and that's made so you can drop that shelf right there. There is a small 1/4-inch gap between the front of the cabinet and the front of the shelf. That is intentional because if you had the shelf all the way to the front of the cabinet, it might hit the back of the door. And also it would be hard to line this up to be perfect with the front edge of that cabinet. It might stick out a little weird. So we don't ever do that. We bring this back 1/4 of an inch just to make sure we don't have any issues there with alignment. One other thing you may notice too is that, of course, the shelf is too deep for this cabinet. It's sticking out the back. There's an adjustment right here for that. You can click on that and you can bring it in. You want to make sure that it's touching the back wall of your cabinet just like that. And then if you wanted to, you could add or remove shelf pin holes in the side of your cabinet by clicking on this drop down and adding or removing those. Okay. All right. Then we have cabinet doors next that we're going to talk about. Cabinet doors are here. We're going to use the move command once more. We're going to move this cabinet door. And this time we're going to use the front corner of the door, just like this. And we're going to snap it to this point right here. All right. Now, there is an invisible white dot there that does not print. It's there for you to be able to actually move that door up or down or move it to where it needs to go. And the door has a height adjustment too, which you just saw me move that so that it snaps to that white dot. All right. Let's see. There is a small gap at the top of the base cabinet. This is a 1/4 of an inch right here. That is a on-site standard. So from the top of the cabinet to the top of the door should be a 1/4 of an inch there. That is our company standard. Now, if you have a cabinet with drawers, you will need an 1/8 of an inch gap between each drawer after the first one. So the first one is always going to have a 1/4 inch gap. Anything below that will have an 1/8 inch gap between the drawer fronts. So moving down there, anything lower than that will be an 1/8 of an inch gap between drawers. All right, then you have your countertop block. This is a pretty new one. We're going to add that in here to our drawing. Let's set that down right there. And I'm going to use the move command again. And I'm going to move this to line up with our cabinet here. Oops, hold on a sec, sorry. I want to make sure that we're lined up like so. Okay, and the upper cabinet, or sorry, not the upper cabinet, the countertop block has a few adjustments to it. You can adjust the depth of your counter. You can also adjust your apron height. So if you need it to be lower, you can do that here. Standard comes in 1.5 inches, but it can be different if you need it to be. Now, the left-hand side of that block, you can see that there are a number of options here. So the first one is countertop thickness, which relates to the material of that countertop. If the countertop is veneer or laminate, it will be 3/4 of an inch. That is standard across the board. If the countertop is solid surface, stone, or quartz, it will be one of these other 3 options below. So you have 12 millimeters, 2 centimeters, or 3 centimeters here. So as you click on those, you'll notice that the hatching for the countertop also does change to match that it is being made out of stone now instead of an MDF piece of material. You can adjust that here, no big deal. Yep, so that changes the thickness and the material type. Moving on down the list, you have subtop options. So sometimes you will not need a subtop. That is very rare, but in cases of having a 3 centimeter thick counter, you may not need a subtop. If you have a standard countertop, let's say it's 3/4 of an inch, like veneer, laminate, or 2 centimeter stone, you will also have the subtops here, which we can do subtop strips or full subtops. So a full subtop is going to span the front to the back of that counter. The subtop strips are going to be just the front and the back only at 4 inches wide. Or maybe actually it's, I think, 5 inches wide, but they're just strips of material that sit right there at the front and the back. That's to help save on material costs, but also make sure that we're still supporting that countertop as necessary. All right, so at the very back, this one will only activate if you have a full subtop. So a ledger strip is something that we are going to use in cases where you have a floating counter. So if this counter is against a wall and there's nothing there underneath of it, like no cabinet, then you can use a ledger strip to help support the weight of that counter. A lot of times we'll also use what are called in-wall brackets to also help support the weight of that counter. Those are in the hardware section of your tool palettes, and we'll talk about that here sometime down the road. So I'm going to turn off the ledger for now. Well, I guess I could explain that a little better. So the ledger is a little block of material that gets screwed to the wall, just like that. Then the countertop and the subtop come over and they rest right on top of it. So this block of material is attached to the wall. the countertop is added on after the fact. All right, so we're going to move on now to scribe. So most countertops you will see don't have scribe to them. If there is a material like a veneer or laminate, we can add scribe to that countertop, and that's what that would look like. It's a 1-inch triangular piece of material added to the back of that counter. So that way, if your wall is a little wavy or out of whack, you can scribe that countertop to the wall. If you have a countertop that is made out of solid surface or stone, you will not actually have the ability to scribe that. So what we'll do is the installers will take a caulk gun and they will caulk that countertop to the drywall to fill in that gap. So stone and solid surface, we do not scribe those to the wall, just to make note of. The block prevents you from doing that though too. So in case you forget, it's made so you can't do that anyway. When we get into islands later, you're going to have an apron on the back and the front sometimes. That's like if you have a freestanding unit in the middle of the room and both sides need to be finished, you can have an apron at the front and the back using that here. So those are some options within that countertop block. Let's go ahead and delete that one. Then we'll skip on through binning, strips, and sub-base. Those aren't really relevant to what we're doing here. If you had a floating shelf on the wall, there is a pre-made floating shelf block here, which shows one of the in-wall brackets there. That would be inside of the drywall framed wall. And then the arm of the bracket sticks out and the shelf slips right over top of that. So we'll get into that as we talk about more cabinets as well. One type of pole that is not a bought pole that we haven't talked about yet is what's called a finger pole. Finger poles are very specific. We make those on our cabinets, and how it works is we are looking at this area of the cabinet here. The cabinet door has to be lowered so that you have a 1-inch gap in order to be able to get your fingers inside of that area there to be able to reach in and use the finger pole. Now, finger poles, typically we're going to make a radiused one. It's going to be a 1/4 inch flat on the top and then a 1/2 inch back or a 1/2 inch radius channel for you to run or grab with your finger and pull the door open. These aren't as common, but you will still see them from time to time. And then there's a different variation of that called a chamfered finger pole, which is more like this, where it's the same detail, it's just a chamfered edge instead of a rounded edge. So those are finger poles. They're made into the cabinet door. They're not a bought item. So that's something that we haven't really touched base on yet because it's not really a hardware, but it does go right here. One other thing you want to pay attention to too with finger poles is that you typically will need to have a vertical rail here behind there, so that way you don't see into the cabinet when the door or the drawer are shut. If this wasn't here, you'd be able to see right into that cabinet. So that's important to note. Last thing on this cabinet components part is the drawer boxes. So drawer boxes have a block here. These blocks are adjustable, just like the other cabinet blocks. They have 2-inch increments built in, limiting it to 28 inches by 10 inches wide or deep. They also have height adjustments here. Generally, you want to stay within 1 inch. So like 8 inches, 9 inches, 10 inches. You don't really want to go like 9 3/4 or 10 1/4 or something like that. You want to make this as simple as you can. So we'll make it a 1-inch increment there. And there are other options in here too. We usually don't use these, but these are different slides that you can activate. And if you notice on this block too, you can see that there is a dimension for the depth and the height of the drawer placed in here as well. So that covers the cabinet blocks. And in the next video, we're going to be talking about actual cabinet drafting. So as we get into that, we'll talk more about what it takes to actually draw a cabinet drawing.